Do you know what happens after you file a tax court petition? I'm Andrew Bosserman, former IRS agent and current tax attorney and founder of Boss Tax Law. And in this video, I want to walk through what happens after you file a tax court petition and going through kind of a complete timeline of everything that happens. So, if you've received a notice of deficiency and have just filed a tax court petition or are thinking about doing so, you file the petition and then all of a sudden you might be thinking, okay, what's next? I've done what I needed to do. The first step, which you met, is that you filed your petition within the 90-day required period, which is extremely important. But there's a lot of things that happen after that, and that's what I want to go through in this video. So you file your petition. What happens immediately? Well, really nothing on your end. The IRS has 60 days to review your petition and file what's called an answer. An answer is essentially their response to your petition where they'll either admit or deny your claims. And most of the time they'll say things like they deny or don't have enough information to respond. And that's standard. There isn't too much that goes on with the answer, but they might provide further details about their position or why they think they're right about the tax deficiency. But in many cases, it's a very short, sort of bare bones pleading. Also during this time, tax court is going to assign your case a docket number. And this is your case's unique identifier. It goes on all documents you file with the court. So it's important to keep that number as well. And also another thing that's important to keep in mind is that once a tax court petition is filed, the IRS is legally required to stop all collection activities. So they can't do things like levy your bank account, garnish your wages, or put a lien on your property while the case is pending. And I have seen the IRS continue to do that and have had to file motions to get them to stop. But in most cases, they automatically stop. And if they don't, you can get them to do so. Eventually, you'll also receive a notice about what judge has been assigned to your case. And remember, tax court judges travel to different cities to hear a case. So wherever city you checked in your petition is where you will see the judge if your case gets that far. So after the IRS files their answer, your case typically goes into sort of a holding pattern or a time where not necessarily anything happens very quickly. Kind of as an overview, tax court's philosophy is to encourage settlement. So something like 90% or more of all cases settle before going to trial. They don't want to clog up the court or the judge's time with cases that could be resolved through negotiation. So they give both sides plenty of time to talk and try to resolve the issue. That's you and the IRS. During this period, your case will likely be assigned to an IRS Appeals Officer if you haven't already discussed your case with an appeals officer before. This is oftentimes a good thing because appeals officers are independent from the IRS examination division, meaning they're not the same people that audited you. And their job is to look at cases objectively and try to find reasonable settlements. You'll receive a separate letter from them about providing information and scheduling an appeals conference, which can be done in phone, virtually, or in person. You can represent yourself at this conference and throughout the whole tax court process, but it's generally recommended to hire a tax attorney or other tax professional to represent you, as we're used to both meetings with appeals and also proceedings before tax court. But as part of the appeals meeting process, you'll need to gather all documentation and essentially make an argument about why the IRS is wrong. And also start thinking through settlement options or what you would be willing to settle for. It's rare, but it happens, that the IRS will just concede all issues in your favor and say, sorry, we were wrong. It can happen, but more likely you're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle. So let's continue talking about settlements because that's where most cases end. Like I mentioned before, about 90% or more of tax court cases settle before trial. And part of this is what you're going to discuss through the appeals conference. You'll discuss the facts of the case, the law, hazards of litigation, and that's just a fancy term for saying what could go wrong for either side if the case goes to trial. And the appeals officer has authority to settle your case based on the hazards of litigation. So, for example, if the IRS thinks they have a 50% chance of winning at trial, they might try to settle for 50% of the disputed amount. If you are able to reach a settlement agreement with IRS Appeals or with the IRS attorney, you'll sign a document, generally a stipulated decision. This resolves your case, and the tax court will issue an order dismissing it. So even if you can't work settlement out with IRS Appeals, then your case generally is going to be calendared for trial. You're going to receive a notice saying your case for trial that tells you the city and the trial session when your case will be heard. And like I mentioned before, tax court travels around the country, the judges travel. So you most likely in your petition checked a place close to you. So you will go to that city on the date for your trial. But just because you received a notice for trial doesn't mean you're actually going to have a trial in your case. During this period where we're preparing for trial, you're still going to have lots of discussions with the IRS attorneys. You can still discuss settlement. Both sides must still exchange evidence, work on preparing trial memorandums, stipulations of fact. You have to prepare any exhibits you need for trial, testimonies, witnesses. So if you haven't already gotten professional representation and you make it this far, you should really, I recommend getting professional representation by a tax attorney because there's many more rules and procedures, and someone who's familiar with tax court can make a huge difference in the outcome of your case. But if you fully prepare for trial and are unable to settle your case with the IRS, then you'll actually have a trial at tax court when your case is scheduled for trial. So tax court trials are generally a little different than trials you see on TV. They can oftentimes be a little less formal, but they're still real court proceedings with rules of evidence and procedures that need to be followed. Tax court trials can last only a few hours to a few days, depending on the complexity. They're technically a little quicker because most of the time you and the IRS will have stipulated to many of the facts, meaning you're not disagreeing about any of the facts. You're more so arguing over how the law should be applied to those facts. So it takes less time than having to prove every fact you need to. After both sides present their case and go through the whole trial process, the trial ends. But, unlike other types of trials you may see on TV or have witnessed before, tax court judges don't make their decision right away. They generally review the case, take it under advisement for anywhere from a few months to it can be even over a year or more. And they will go back, review all the evidence, research, and write a formal opinion saying their decision in the case. And you'll be notified once that decision is entered. And once you receive the tax court decision, you have some options. If you won, congrats. The IRS will adjust the tax deficiency and your case is over. If you lost or if the decision is mixed, then you are able to appeal to a federal appeals court. And the IRS generally also has the right to appeal as well. Appeals can be expensive and time-consuming, and you can generally only appeal if there was some sort of legal error. You can't always appeals courts don't deal with factual disputes. But definitely discuss with an attorney if you're thinking of appealing. So there you go. Essentially, we just really quickly went through the complete journey of a tax court case, all the way from receiving the notice of deficiency to filing the petition to settlement negotiations through trial. We went through it quickly, but there's a few key takeaways I want you to remember. First of all, most cases settle and don't go to trial. So definitely keep an open mind during negotiations and make sure that you stay organized and document anything. And really, that's my second point, because in order to have the best possible settlement strategy, you need to be organized and document and have backup for your positions. And finally, understand that the tax court process just takes time. It can take, oftentimes 12 to 24 months from start to finish. It's definitely not a quick process, but it's worth it to contest your issues before the IRS and oftentimes get a much better result, get the amount reduced or eliminated that the IRS says you owe. And one final point, definitely don't go this alone if you don't have to. A tax attorney or other qualified professional can help you navigate this whole process and increase your chances of a favorable outcome. And also don't necessarily discount not hiring a tax attorney because of fees. Oftentimes, for example, with my clients, I often can structure incentive fees so that, if we're successful in the case, then I get a success fee. So you're not necessarily out a bunch of money without any guarantee of a result. But anyways, thanks so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.